I've always defined myself as first generation because my parents were not born here in the United States. So I'm the first in my family to be born in the U.S.
Bienvenidos a su nuevo podcast favorito. My name is Bridget Hurtado, and I am the host of Lecciones De Vida. I am so excited to be here today, where we take a deep dive into the heart of the Latino experiences, the struggles, the triumphs, and what resonates with the community as a whole. And by my side, I have my amazing co-host, Elisa Fonseca, and mental health professional.
Thank you, Bridget. Hello, my name is Elisa. I work for Mental Health. I'm really excited to be here, to be part of this amazing podcast. Today we're going to talk about being first generation and what it means being Latino. So I have two amazing guests with me, and I would like you to introduce yourself, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Bridget. My name is Vanessa, and I am a first generation Latina. I work in the field of education. I'm a school counselor, a high school counselor, and for me, that's been one of my proudest moments, just being the first in my family to not only get, receive a higher education, but also the first in my family to have a career, which is something that's very new for my family, right? So I'm definitely proud of the milestones that I've achieved throughout my life. So thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you both for having me here. This is a new experience for myself. Never been on a podcast before. My name is Nathan. I'm 28 years old, and I currently work as a special education teacher.
Well, welcome both. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about what is a first generation student? What is a first generation Latino? What puts you in that category?
I think there's a lot of different definitions. I think when you go on Google, you get different things, right? But I've always defined myself as first generation because my parents were not born here in the United States. So I'm the first in my family to be born in the U.S. I think considered a first generation is also someone maybe the first in your family to navigate, going into higher education too, right? Or maybe being the first in your family to get a high school diploma or getting a bachelor's degree. That's how I would define first generation.
Very similar to her. Actually Googled before what it means to be first generation. And when you Google it, there's like first generation immigrants, first generation students. But when I think of first generation in general, it's the fact that both of your parents were not born in the country that you currently live in. So with both of our parents being born in the country of Mexico, that's really what defines us as being first generation. And when she first approached me about this podcast, I thought it was just super interesting, coming from the fact that our perspectives are both very different. Her parents came here at a more of an older age in their teens, while my parents came here when they were very small and young. So
yeah, well, I'm excited to dive in. Yeah. Elisa, do you want to introduce our cheeseman bowl?
I do want to. Okay, let me see.
But this is the good kind of cheeseman.
Yes. So right here we have a couple of questions. So I'm going to pass out the bowl and then you can answer it.
Okay. Mix it around a little.
A ver.
I'm like looking away and I'm like, they're covered. Okay. What do you wish non-first generation individuals better understood about the experience of being the first family member to pursue higher education or a professional career? You can start off.
Well, one thing that I feel that people better understood is coming from the fact, being a first generation student, you don't always have that model or that person that you could look up to that already has gone through that process. For example, I think of me being in high school, getting ready to go to college soon. I didn't have really older uncles or older siblings that went through that experience that knew what you needed to do in order to get to those four-year colleges. I went to a highly competitive high school where a lot of the students had tutors. They had older siblings who already applied. They knew exactly what they needed to do in order to get into those schools. And for me, on the other hand, I really didn't have any of that. And it was kind of a time right before the internet came. So I think what I wish that people better understood is that I think sometimes we need more assistance or we need more guidance when it comes to getting that help. Just because of the fact we don't always have those people that we could look up to who went through those experiences themselves.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I totally agree.
I think role models are like really, really part of like how you achieve something or how you don't.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Porque es la primera vez que estamos en este journey, se puede decir, right? It's the first time, like you said, we're achieving something. We're the first ones to break these barriers, you know, setting that tone for, you know, your kids or the kids after.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think another thing, you know, I would say to someone that's not a first generation is a first generation student or individual probably wears multiple hats, right? So like me growing up, I not only was a daughter, but I also had to learn to clean, right? That was an expectation to clean. You need to learn how to cook because you're a woman. My parents didn't speak English, so I was a translator in the family, right? Between when teachers are telling my parents and I had to be the one to say, hey, this is what the teacher's saying, this is what my parents saying. So I think wearing multiple hats of you don't just get to be just a daughter or a student. You kind of have you grow up a little quicker because the expectation is different too, being a Latina and maybe being a woman on top of that layer as well.
Oh no, that's something different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay.
Okay, let's continue.
Yeah. Shake up the cheese
Okay,
bowl.
let me see a little bit. Okay. Okay, let's see. So we have, what type of struggles did you face as a first generation college student?
So I would say for me, I was the first in my family to go to a 4-year college right after high school. So I have an older brother. My brother went to community college, which even that was like a difficult to navigate going to community college. How do you apply? How do you apply to financial aid, right? But then I was going to a 4-year institution where I had to learn what is the cost of going to this school, right? I didn't know when you get accepted to a school, you got to pay a non-refundable fee to secure your spot. And at the time, it was like $100. $100 is a lot to my parents, right? So I had to make sure my parents are like, you're going to go, right? Segura que vas a ir because I don't get this money back. So that was one thing. I think navigating financial aid was another thing. And also navigating of when you go to college, you have to figure out how you're going to go to college because I didn't have a car. So I was taking public transportation for a little bit. How do you select your classes that you're supposed to go on campus and tour so that you know where everything is? You don't get that. No one tells you that when you're first gen. You kind of have to figure that out as you go, right? Knowing what resources campuses offer. And the biggest thing is I had to learn to ask for help, to not feel ashamed of when I don't know. And it's okay to say, I don't know. I need help in guidance of going to a 4-year college and what that looks like. How do you choose your classes, right? You're supposed to see a counselor. I didn't know that. And you're supposed to see your counselor every semester so that you know what new classes to take. Things like that I think were different because my parents couldn't help me in that. And my brother couldn't help me with that.
I think it goes back to a little bit about the guidance part that I was talking about before. But in terms of like struggles that I had as being a first generation student, for me personally, really came to when I transferred to the university level. And my struggle was the actual discipline act of being a student. I think in high school, I kind of just breezed by classes and did pretty well, just not really like sitting at a desk and studying super hard. But when I went to the community college level, to the university level, my biggest struggle that I found was that I never grew up with the discipline of being like a very hardworking student, which meant just, I mean, it's the simple fact of just sitting at a desk and studying a notebook, but I myself didn't have that discipline in that. So my biggest struggle was kind of acclimating to being a real student and just putting your head down and just, I mean, doing something you don't want to do. And I don't think that was instilled in me at a young age. At a young age, I was able to do well because I was able to do well. I was a little bit smart, but when it got to the higher levels of education, I didn't have that discipline of just being able to sit at a desk and do work like that. So that's something I really had to teach myself. And it's super hard learning how to be a student like that. And if you're not kind of given that guidance or your parents telling you to do that at a young age, it's something you have to develop older as an adult, which is a lot more difficult than when you're young. That like compared to, for example, I had minority friends like Indians or Asians where when they were young, their parents would take them home and the first thing they do is they sit at a desk and their parents just make them do homework for an hour straight, for example. I mean, I did my homework too, but I didn't have that kind of push from my parents to really kind of just tell me what to do and say, hey, sit down and do this and don't stop. And I think even that kind of sounds cruel in a way. You kind of need that discipline as a child because when it comes to being older and having to take a class, it's a lot harder than just taking little classes like that in elementary school. It's a lot more difficult to learn, and especially as an adult.
Yeah. So I think the barriers as a first generation is that financial piece for sure, that mentorship, that acclimation and assimilation. But, and Elisa, feel free to chime in as well. I want to know a little more of what role did your parents play? Because my parents, you would assume, you know, them migrating, my parents migrated here when, you know, they were maybe like in their 20s. They didn't even make it past second grade. So you would think they would want me to go to college. But as a Latina woman, my dad instilled in me that I'm going to get married, have a husband, and have a ton of kids. So my parents didn't support me in going to tour the campus, you know? They're like, ¿qué voy a hacer ahí? No tengo negocio ahí. Me voy a gastar la gasolina, you know? So I want to know a little more of like, yes, we have these barriers already predisposed as first generation going through this journey, but what role did your parents have in that?
I would say for me it was the opposite. So my parents, so my dad's Salvadorian, so he came from El Salvador when he was maybe 13, 14. My dad went straight to work, right? You would think at 13, 14 he'd go to school, right? No, my dad went straight into the workforce. My mom came from Mexico a little older. She was about 19 or 18 years old. My mom also went straight to work. My parents instilled in my brother and myself the importance of education. So that was something that I grew up, my dad telling me, you need to go to college, you need to get a degree because I don't want you to ever financially be dependent of a man. And that was always instilled in me to go to college. I didn't want to go to college. And my dad gave me an ultimatum and was like, you're either going to go to college or you're going to pick up your stuff and you're going to leave my home because I won't have someone not going to school living under my home. So for me, it was instilled, you have to go, but it was more of the, I don't want you to be in a relationship and feel stuck. I want you to be independent because I want you to have some financial freedom. And if you're ever put in a situation where you need to leave your significant other, you've built yourself a life where you can do so. So in that aspect, even though my parents didn't really know all the details of what education entails, it was always like, you need to go, you need to go. Even when I got my bachelor's degree, I was done. I was ready to be in my full career mode. And my dad was like, you need to get your master's. And I was like, Dad, I don't want to get my master's.
Amazing.
Yeah, I want to just go into the work field and work and be a teacher and make money. And my dad was like, absolutely not. You need to go and pursue higher education. And, you know, a little different from what you're talking about, but even then my dad didn't let me date. So I wasn't even allowed to date until after I had my master's degree. But that was like a really big thing of just like education was first. And then once I got my master's degree, I think my dad saw that I was in my career and it changed. And he felt like all my hard work, all this pushing my daughter, it really made a difference in her life.
And Nate, you can speak on this, right? But us as Latinas, we have an additional barrier to like the dating or what the gender norm is for us. Not just being a woman, but a Latina woman, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see the difference when it comes to how like a dad in a Latino home views his daughter versus like his son. Like, for example, when it goes back to like her dad not allowing her to date, I know for a fact like many Latinas or where their dads are super strict and they don't let them do this, they don't let them do that, they can't stay out late, be home by a certain time, no sleepovers. But then it kind of makes me think of like my experience as being a male where and we kind of talked about this a little bit, but it's almost like a machismo aspect where like the dad doesn't really care. Like I could stay out maybe a little bit later.
You can do anything you want.
No
I could
curfew.
go over for the weekend. My dad would allow me to bring a girl over versus like when I think about how he treated my sister and how much more strict he was with my sister, it was none of that. And it's just interesting seeing that dynamic to how he views his daughter versus how he views his sons. And it kind of makes sense in a way where like girls are precious and you really want to take care of them, but it's almost like a controlling aspect of it, which goes back to the machismo way of how Latino men are.
So going back with to your parents, with you specifically in education, were they supportive? Because I know they came to the country at a young age, right?
Yeah, my parents came here when they were a lot younger. But when it comes to education, me growing up as a kid, I was very like self-determined in terms of me doing well in school. So school wasn't like something that they super pushed me on because I was able to do well, and they wouldn't have to tell me, oh, do your homework, do all that. But when it comes to like, oh, what you need to do when you're older, what career you need to have, my parents always took it as, you're going to do two things. You're going to either go to college, find a career, or you're going to find some other type of trade or job that's going to be able to keep you self-sustaining as an adult. It's basically saying like, either you're going to go to college, get a real job, or you're not going to live in this house. Right? You're not going to be allowed to be a loser. Yeah. But in terms of like pushing college, it wasn't like, oh, you need to go to college, because I kind of already had that in me. So they already knew that I was on the pathway to want to attend college. I always wanted to attend college. Okay. But it's basically there's a big black and white when it comes to like, you're either doing this or you're doing that. Yeah. But you're not going to be a loser in this house. Yeah. And that was always like a premise that I had going into an adulthood.
Entonces, both of you are in education. So did your parents support that, or were they like, tú vas a ser un doctor, you're going to be a doctor or lawyer? Because my parents were like, you got to go where there's money, and there's no money in education. No hay dinero en educación. Entonces, vas a ser doctora or no? So how was that for both of you?
Okay, so exactly what you said, exactly what my dad, when I declared a major in my undergrad, and I told my dad I wanted to, I was declaring child development. My dad's like, what is that? And I explained to him what child development is. And he goes, well, what career can you get in that? I'm like, a teacher or a director. My dad was like, no, you need to be a lawyer. You need to be a doctor. You need to have a carrera that's going to provide, a lot of money for yourself. And a part of me understood where my dad was coming from, because my parents both, didn't come from money, right? My parents still don't make a lot of money. So my parents, it's almost like that expectation, like, you're going to take us out of poverty, kind of, right? Like you are the person, you are our golden child. Yeah. You're the first to go to college, you're going to have a career, and you're going to almost like be the one that we can all live in a big house together, right? Because that's how Latinos are. You live with your parents forever.
That's a whole other story.
Yeah. So my dad was definitely not happy when I was, declaring my major and the path I went. And it wasn't until my senior year of college of where my dad finally came to acceptance, when I was like, I'm graduating, I'm getting a diploma in child development. Like there's no going back. And my dad finally came to terms, but for a really long time, my dad did not accept that I was wanting to study education. Yeah.
It's a lot of pressure too, I feel like. Even though you didn't want to do something, you have to do it because of money, and it doesn't matter if you're happy or not. Like,
correct.
Do it.
You do it, yeah. Because they associate our parents really only, I think when your parents come, your parents really only think of two big careers, lawyer and doctor. Yeah. But there's so many other careers that can be fulfilling and that can also give you a great, satisfied life. And you can still make good money. It doesn't have to be those two career paths.
And that's what I acknowledge about the Latino community, right? Specifically what we're talking about right now as first generation, that we build that resilience. So we stand our ground. So we're not going to go to school for 4 or 5 years like a lot of people I know and study a major, and then they're like, oh, I hate it, but my parents forced me. Like, we stand our ground, like, hey, you know what? This is what I love. I want to make you proud, but I'm still going to, do what I need to do. Yeah, pursue my dreams. Yeah.
I think my parents kind of steered me into, like, going into certain professions. Like, for example, when I graduated university, I thought I wanted to become a lawyer. But when I ended up switching up and then deciding to be a teacher, I think my parents knew that it's a stable career. They give you good benefits. They give you a good pension. Are you going to be rich? No. Are you going to be able to sustain yourself? Yes. So I think they were happy with that, and just that I'm going to be fine. I'm not going to be super rich, but at the end of the day, they knew I was picking a career that was safe. And I think especially like for like my dad, and that's like a huge thing, like a career that's stable, like a career that will give you some form of retirement. And at the end of the day, that's really all they wanted for me.
Yeah. All right, we forgot about the Cheeseman Bowl. Nate, you want to do the honors?
You get one of these.
Shake it up a little bit.
All righty. Have you experienced feelings of imposter syndrome or doubts about your ability due to your first generation background? How have you overcome them?
That's a good one. That is a good one. So I think when kind of like what Nathan was saying, when he went to a school, or maybe, I don't know if you did mention it, maybe you were telling me it, but I also went to a high school, or I lived in a city where majority of the population was Asian. Right. So I was a minority at my high school. right? So I definitely felt an imposter syndrome, right? I felt like I don't belong here. And I think too, I felt ashamed to be Latina, right? I was made fun of for the color of my skin, for being brown. That was something that I had a hard time dealing with. And I remember growing up, I hated my skin color. I was ashamed, right? I associated beauty with lighter skin tone, right? And then being made fun of for having a little more body hair, right? I'm Latina, right? I have more hair. That was something that was also, I felt ashamed of too. And I didn't want to associate with my culture. And so when I was in high school, I refused to speak Spanish. I refused to identify myself as like a Mexican Salvadorian. I said, I'm American. I was born in the US, right? I rejected my culture. And then when I went to a college that 90% of the population was Latino, and everyone was speaking Spanish, and everyone was representing their culture and loved the food and and just embracing that made me really realize, wow, I've turned away my culture, and for what? And it was because I wanted to fit in to the kids that, you know, at the high school, I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be liked. And I realized I could be myself and find my people that will love and accept me for who I am. And so going to college, I fell in love all over again with being a Latina. I learned Spanish again, and I took Spanish classes in college. And I had my mom talk to me about, you know, values and tradition and all the things that, you know, we do as Mexicans and as Salvadorians, and eating the food. So it definitely was a journey for me in falling in love with myself again as a Latina woman.
Nice.
I don't know if I necessarily had like an imposter syndrome. I mean, the only thing I can really think about that is like when I was young in grade school, I went from moving to Whittier to moving to Fullerton, California. And then I remember my dad telling me, like, going to this new school that, oh, there's going to be a lot of Asians and you're going to have to work really hard. And and when I went to that new school, maybe not like I felt necessarily out of place, but I did realize that a lot of the kids around me were smart, and it made me honestly kind of want to work harder. It made me think that, you know, maybe I don't look like everyone else, but that's not going to stop me from trying to be a good student or working super hard. So I don't know if that's like necessarily imposter syndrome. You do feel kind of out of place at first, but at the end of the day, you start making friends and you realize that, hey, like, I'm just like everyone else. And you do have those few students who will kind of be rude to you because you're Mexican, or they'll like talk to you a certain way, or they'll kind of make fun of you here and there. But I mean, I never really let that get to me too much. There were only a few times where it made me angry, but at the end of the day, I felt bad for the kid because I felt like they were jealous of me in some way.
Or what
A great way to look at it, right?
That's the way to look at it.
Or what about imposter syndrome as an adult, right? Not necessarily, you know, a syndrome, but applying to jobs. Did you ever say, like, you know, I can't probably get this, or talking yourself out of it? Like, you didn't feel like you were qualified enough?
Maybe like for certain jobs where you look at like the demographic of everyone working there and they're all white. Maybe like you feel like you're out of place a little bit. But I mean, that's just kind of life sometimes. That's just kind of life, and it's you have to try your best not to look at it, and it does seem unfair at times. But I mean, what are you gonna do at that point? You have to be the one to change that. You have to be the one to change that, and it starts with us, right?
Yeah.
It starts with us.
It does. And it starts right here, having these conversations,
Yes.
right? And this can go on and on forever and ever. And I appreciate you both for sharing your experiences and your journey, right, to where you are now. And we wish you all the best. Before we run out of time, I have one quick question for both of you. If you can tell your younger self something, what would it be?
It could be anything, like regarding any topic.
I would say love yourself. Love yourself in every way that you are, every imperfection that you have. Love yourself, because that, you know, brings your self-confidence, your self-esteem. Love every part of your body. You are perfect in imperfect ways, right? And to own who you are and never feel like you have to pretend to be someone you're not.
I love that. Yeah. Like little clap.
If I could tell my younger self something, probably just work a little bit harder. I think when hardships come sometimes, or things don't go the way you want to, or you didn't do as well in a class, or maybe you wanted to get this job instead, I think it came to, when I look back at things, I'm like, you know what, I was having a lot of fun. So maybe if I just worked a little bit harder and didn't have as much fun, things would be a little bit different.
We work hard and play hard.
Yeah.
All right, I appreciate you both. Well, we
Thank you,
appreciate you
yeah.
both for
Thanks
taking
for
the time
having
to
us.
join us. Yeah, and
Thanks
with
so much for
that-
having us.
Open
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah, well, with that, we're running out of time. So thank you all for joining us today in the Lección del Día, Lecciones de la Vida. My name is Bridget Hurtado.
My name is Elisa Fonseca. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, next time. And stay tuned. We have more information on our first annual Latino College Expo in Chicago. So we'll provide more information on that. So hasta luego.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
That was good.